The room felt colder than it should have been. Leah stood frozen, her hands trembling as the cry of the baby echoed against the sterile walls of the hospital. The nurse's voice was quiet but piercing. "Her name is Emma. She's yours." The words hit Leah like a punch to the gut. She had no idea what to do with this revelation. Her mind raced, trying to make sense of the impossible, but it didn't add up. She wasn't ready for this. "No, this can't be right," she muttered, her voice barely audible. Her heart hammered in her chest as she slowly turned to face the nurse. The baby, a tiny bundle of innocence, was being placed in her arms. Leah's eyes stung with tears that she couldn't explain. Her life, a carefully planned routine, was shattered in an instant. The door to the room opened, and in walked Jason, her ex-partner. His eyes met Leah's, filled with disbelief and confusion. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice trembling as he took a step closer to the bed. Leah sat in the quiet hospital room, the weight of the moment crashing down on her. The baby, Emma, lay in the bassinet, looking so small and innocent. How was this her reality now? She had never prepared for this. Not once had she imagined herself as a mother, especially not under these circumstances. She could still hear the nurse's words echoing in her mind. "She's yours." A shiver ran down Leah's spine. She wanted to be angry, to scream, but her throat tightened with a grief she couldn't fully name. The baby had no place in her life, and yet there was no denying that Emma was her responsibility now. Was this some cruel mistake? She couldn't grasp the truth. The door creaked open, and Jason stepped inside, his gaze fixed on her. "Leah, what the hell is going on?" he asked, his voice strained. She didn't know how to answer. She only shook her head, her body trembling from the shock, still not fully believing what had happened. Leah's mind was spinning as she looked at the baby, now wrapped in a soft blanket and sleeping peacefully. It didn't feel real. She had spent the last few months trying to rebuild her life after the end of her relationship with Jason. The last thing she needed was a child, especially one that she never knew existed. She let out a shaky breath, feeling the pressure of the room close in on her. Her hands shook as she held Emma, unsure of what to do next. She couldn't bear to face the world outside this room. Where would she even begin to explain this? The door opened again, this time with a little more force. Jason walked in, looking more disheveled than before. His eyes met hers, filled with fear and anger. "Leah, this isn't right. What the hell is going on?" he demanded. She looked at him helplessly, unable to find the words to make any of this make sense. Jason's voice pierced the silence again, this time more forcefully. "You're telling me this child is mine?" He sounded furious, confused, and utterly lost. Leah opened her mouth to answer, but no words came out. Her heart was racing, and her thoughts were tangled. She didn't want to say it aloud, but it was clear. Jason wasn't ready to be a father, just as she wasn't ready to be a mother. And yet, here they were. Her eyes flickered over to the nurse, standing by the doorway. She had been quiet throughout the exchange, offering no explanation, no help. She was just here, watching, waiting. Leah didn't want to look at her anymore. The room felt too small, too suffocating. I didn't know about this child," Leah whispered, more to herself than to Jason. She couldn't shake the overwhelming sense of panic rising in her chest. Leah couldn't breathe. Her hands were trembling as she held Emma. Jason's question echoed in her mind. "Are you sure she's mine?" The baby was just a small, fragile being, and yet, her presence changed everything. The past few months had been about survival for Leah. Trying to rebuild after Jason left, trying to figure out what her future looked like without him. But now she had to figure out how to be a mother. The thought alone made her feel like she was drowning. She was not ready for this. She had never planned for this. She looked down at the baby, her innocent eyes staring back at her. The door creaked open again, and Jason stepped closer, his face softening for the first time since he'd walked into the room. "Leah, we need to figure this out," he said quietly, his voice more gentle now. Leah simply nodded, unable to speak. Leah sat at the kitchen table, the weight of Emma's presence heavy on her heart. She hadn't planned for this life, hadn't prepared for the responsibility. Yet every time she looked at the baby, something shifted inside her. Was it love? Was it guilt? She wasn't sure, but Emma had become her anchor, a tiny thread that tethered her to something real. But the fear, oh, the fear, was unrelenting. Could she really do this? Could she raise this child alone? Her past had never prepared her for motherhood. She'd barely learned to take care of herself, let alone someone else. Leah rubbed her face, trying to erase the exhaustion that seemed to sink deeper with every passing day. She hadn't even slept last night. She wasn't sure what to do next, but she knew she couldn't back out now. Leah watched as Jason walked out the door, leaving her alone with Emma. The silence that followed his departure was deafening. She'd expected things to be difficult between them, but she hadn't anticipated how utterly alone she'd feel. Jason's abandonment was one thing, but now, this child, Emma, was another. There were nights Leah lay awake, staring at the ceiling, questioning her choices, questioning herself. But Emma needed her. No one else could fill that role. She had to find a way to make this work for both of them. Leah's heart ached with the realization that she was completely on her own now. There was no turning back. Days passed in a blur. Leah could barely keep up with the demands of the baby, and the weight of her emotional turmoil never seemed to let up. She had tried to reach out to her mother, but her calls were met with silence. Family, friends, everyone seemed to be stepping away. The harder she tried to make things work, the more people seemed to retreat into their own worlds, unable or unwilling to offer support. It was as though the world was judging her for what had happened, for the life she was now living. And maybe they were right. Leah was starting to feel like she had failed before she even had a chance to begin. She looked down at Emma, who was sleeping soundly in her arms, and sighed. How do I give her a future when I don't even know my own? Leah sat by the window, watching as the rain fell in sheets. The world outside was blurring, much like her thoughts. She had never felt so disconnected from everything. It was as though she was living in someone else's life. Leah didn't know who she was anymore. The woman she had once been, free, independent, was slipping further away. She was just a mother now. But what kind of mother was she? Her own doubts clawed at her, demanding answers she couldn't give. How could she even begin to provide for Emma when she could barely care for herself? But every time Leah looked into Emma's eyes, a spark of something she hadn't felt in years ignited. Maybe it wasn't love yet, but it was something. And that was enough. For now. Leah's heart ached as she looked at Emma, who was now wide awake, staring up at her with curious eyes. "What do I do now, Emma?" she whispered softly. It felt like the weight of the world rested on her shoulders. She was only 28, but the responsibility she carried was overwhelming. She couldn't even remember the last time she had felt truly happy. All she wanted was for things to be different, for her life to be hers again. But it wasn't. This baby needed her, and as much as Leah resented the life that had been forced upon her, she knew there was no turning back. She was Emma's mother, whether she was ready or not. Leah felt the tension rising with every passing day. The phone calls, the whispers, the judgment. It was all too much. Family and friends, once supportive, were now distant, unsure of how to help her or what to say. Leah's mother had called once only to ask, "Are you sure you can handle this?" The question lingered, gnawing at her. Could she? Was she enough? Jason hadn't been much better. He barely spoke to her anymore, his guilt and anger making him cold and unreachable. And the worst part was, Leah understood. He hadn't asked for this either. But that didn't change the fact that she was here, alone with Emma, alone with the responsibility. Every day felt like a battle, and Leah wasn't sure how much longer she could fight. Leah sat in the park, Emma cradled in her arms, the sunlight filtering through the trees above. It was a quiet afternoon, but the stillness only made the silence louder. She had tried to reach out to Jason again, but his response had been short, dismissive. "I can't do this, Leah. I don't even know what I'm supposed to say." His words stung, but she couldn't blame him. They had both been thrust into a situation neither of them wanted. And yet, Emma needed them both. Leah had hoped foolishly that Jason would step up, that somehow he would find his way back to her. But as the days passed, Leah realized that hope was fading. The world outside seemed to move on, leaving her standing still, trapped in this new, unwanted reality. The argument with Jason had been inevitable, and it came with a force that left Leah breathless. "I'm not the one who gets to decide everything, Leah," Jason yelled, his face flushed with frustration. Leah's own anger flared up in response. Why was it all on her? He had a right to be angry, but so did she. She was the one left holding Emma, the one dealing with the late nights, the crying, the overwhelming sense of being unprepared. Jason was distant, his mind preoccupied with his own emotions, while Leah had to navigate a world that seemed to be turning its back on her. She couldn't let him off the hook. "I can't do this alone, Jason," she snapped back, her voice shaking with a mix of fear and anger. "I need you." But even as the words left her mouth, Leah knew they wouldn't change anything. As the argument died down, the silence that followed was even worse. Leah sat on the couch, her head in her hands, trying to steady her breath. She had never felt so alone, so lost. It wasn't just Jason. It was everyone. The friends who had distanced themselves, the family who didn't know how to help. Leah was drowning, and no one seemed to see it. She had thought that if she could just get through the first few weeks, things would get better. But they hadn't. They only seemed to get harder. Every day was a fight to stay afloat, and Leah didn't know how much longer she could keep pretending she had it all under control. "I'm not good at this," she whispered to herself, her voice breaking. "I'm not good enough." The days felt like an endless cycle. Leah's attempts to keep it together were wearing thin. She had been reaching out to a few people, but each time the response was either a cold silence or a comment that made her feel more isolated. It was as though no one understood. No one could see the constant struggle, the overwhelming sense of being unworthy. She wanted to be strong, to take charge of her life and raise Emma the way she deserved. But the world kept pushing back. Every time Leah thought she could stand tall, the weight of her responsibilities brought her to her knees. "I don't know what I'm doing," she admitted quietly to Emma, who was asleep in her arms. "But I'll try. I swear, I'll try." Leah's world shattered when she received the call. The voice on the other end of the phone was cold and formal. "Leah, we've reviewed the paternity test results. I'm afraid Emma isn't Jason's child." Her heart sank, every word leaving her frozen in disbelief. How was this possible? Her mind raced as the words echoed in her head. She had always assumed Emma was Jason's. After all, who else could it be? The thought of someone else being Emma's father felt like a slap in the face. She could barely comprehend the gravity of the situation. The phone felt heavy in her hand as she stood there in stunned silence. What did this mean for her and Emma? Who had betrayed her? Who was the real father? Leah's hands shook as she hung up the phone. Her breath was coming in quick gasps, the room spinning around her. The weight of the revelation crushed her chest. Who was the father then? Thoughts raced, but she couldn't pinpoint a name, a face. Jason, of course, had always been the assumption. But now that foundation crumbled, she felt the ground beneath her give way as the truth hung heavy in the air. She needed answers, but every possible explanation felt like a nightmare she couldn't escape. The betrayal wasn't just about the paternity. It was the lies, the secrets, the missing pieces of a puzzle she couldn't even begin to assemble. She needed to find out who the real father was, but she was terrified of what it would mean for her and Emma. The next day, Leah found herself standing at the edge of the truth, a truth she hadn't been ready to face. She contacted the clinic, demanding to know who had submitted the paternity test. The answer that came back was like a slap in the face. The test had been ordered by someone close to her, someone she had trusted. Her mind was reeling as she tried to make sense of the details. Was it someone from her past? Someone who wanted to hurt her? Or was it something even worse? Leah's thoughts turned dark and she began to question everything she knew about her life, about the people in it. The betrayal ran deeper than she had ever imagined. The paternity test hadn't been a simple mistake, it had been a deliberate act to uncover the truth. A truth Leah wasn't ready to face. Leah sat on the edge of the bed, her hands shaking, as she held the letter she had just received. The handwriting was unfamiliar, yet the words were searingly familiar. "The child is mine, Leah. You need to know the truth." Her stomach churned as the weight of the revelation hit her. The letter was signed by someone from her past, someone she had not thought about in years. Her heart raced as she read the words again. "I didn't want to hurt you, but now you need to know. Emma is my daughter, not Jason's." Her mind spun as she tried to connect the dots. How had this happened? How had this person come into her life without her knowing? And why had they kept this secret from her all these years? Leah stood in the living room, the letter clutched tightly in her hand as her thoughts swirled uncontrollably. Who had betrayed her like this? Who was the father? The truth was out there, but it felt like a dangerous, tangled web. She wasn't sure who she was supposed to trust anymore. Every conversation she'd had, every relationship she'd built, was now clouded by this secret. The past was rising up to meet her in ways she couldn't ignore. Who could do this to me? She thought. The weight of the question pressed on her chest. As much as she wanted to believe this was just a bad dream, she knew it wasn't. The truth would come to light, and when it did, nothing would ever be the same. Leah stood at the door, heart racing, as Jason walked into the room. His expression was unreadable, his jaw clenched with a mix of guilt and anger. "I know what you're going to say, Leah," he began, his voice hoarse. But Leah couldn't keep the storm inside her any longer. She cut him off. "You have no idea what this is like, Jason. You weren't there when I found out. You weren't there when I had to face this reality all on my own." Her voice trembled, the weight of her anger and betrayal breaking through. "I'm not the only one who's been lied to, Jason. I didn't know either. So tell me, Jason, who the hell is Emma's real father?" The question hung in the air like a bomb, the truth finally out. Jason stood frozen, his eyes wide with shock. This wasn't the confrontation he had expected. Jason opened his mouth to speak, but nothing came out. He looked at Leah, then at the floor, as if searching for the words. After a long, painful silence, he finally spoke, his voice quiet. "I wasn't ready for any of this, Leah. I didn't know how to be what you needed me to be. I thought I could walk away and everything would be fine." His eyes met hers, the weight of regret clear in them. "But I should have stayed. I should have been there for you. I'm sorry." Leah felt a lump form in her throat. The apology felt too late, too little. He had abandoned her when she needed him most, and now, with everything hanging by a thread, he wanted to make it right. Could she ever forgive him? Could she ever trust him again? Leah's breath hitched, her anger flaring once again. "You think an apology is going to fix this?" she shouted, her voice rising. "I've been carrying this on my own, Jason. You weren't there for the late nights, the endless worrying, the constant fear that I was failing. You disappeared when I needed you the most." She stepped closer, her eyes filled with emotion. "I didn't just lose you. I lost myself. And now, I don't know how to get back." Jason opened his mouth to respond, but Leah held up her hand, stopping him. "You don't get to fix this with words. Not anymore." Jason finally stepped forward, his voice strained. "I know I failed you, Leah," he said, his voice breaking. "But I swear I never wanted to hurt you. I never meant for any of this to happen." He reached out as if to touch her, but Leah pulled away, her body stiff. She couldn't let him in. Not now. The damage had been done, and no amount of apologies would change the fact that he had abandoned her when it counted the most. Her voice broke as she spoke again, her tears finally falling. "I can't do this, Jason. I can't forgive you. Not after everything." His face twisted in pain as Leah stepped back, finally letting the reality of their situation settle between them. Leah took a step back, her heart breaking with every word she spoke. "I thought we could make this work, Jason," she whispered. "I really did, but now I see that you're just a stranger to me." She wiped the tears from her eyes, trying to regain control. "I can't do this. Not with you, not like this." Jason stood still, his shoulders sagging in defeat. Leah turned to face Emma, her tiny body swaddled in a blanket, completely unaware of the wreckage around her. "I will be the one to raise her," Leah said softly, her voice firm. "And I will do it on my own." The words felt final, sealing the fate of her and Jason's relationship. There would be no going back. This was her decision now, and she would face it alone. Leah sat in the quiet of her living room, Emma asleep in her arms. The decision had been made. She would raise Emma on her own. It wasn't the path she had expected, but it was the only one that made sense now. Her heart ached, but she knew that in this moment, she was doing what was best for them both. The world had tried to push her into corners, telling her she couldn't do this alone, but now she understood that the choice was hers. No one else would decide her fate. She glanced at the empty space where Jason used to be, and for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of peace. It wasn't the peace of a perfect life, but it was enough. "We're going to be okay, Emma," Leah whispered softly, her voice filled with quiet resolve. The following weeks were a blur of small victories and quiet struggles. Leah had learned to take each day one step at a time, focusing only on Emma and herself. Her life was no longer dictated by anyone else's expectations. It was her own. She began to rebuild the fragile parts of herself that had been lost in the chaos. There were hard days, days when she felt like she might collapse under the weight of it all. But then, there were the moments when Emma smiled, or when Leah would look at her daughter and realize that, for all the pain, she had something beautiful. Slowly, Leah began to forgive herself. She wasn't perfect, and she didn't need to be. She was a mother now, and that was enough. Leah hadn't expected much from her family, but when her mother showed up one afternoon with a bouquet of flowers, she was taken aback. "I'm sorry, Leah," her mother said, her voice soft with regret. "I didn't know how to be there for you." The apology felt like a balm to Leah's bruised soul. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start. Her mother was trying, and that was all Leah could ask for. "It's okay," Leah said quietly, her eyes filling with tears. "I don't expect perfection, I just need support." In that moment, Leah realized that she wasn't alone, not entirely. She had Emma, her mother, and maybe even a few others who would eventually find their way back to her. Leah spent the next few days in quiet contemplation. She began to realize that while she had lost some things, old relationships, old versions of herself, she had also gained something precious. She had Emma. And with Emma, she had the opportunity to create a new future, one that didn't rely on the past or the mistakes of others. Leah still had doubts, still feared the unknown, but she was beginning to see that the unknown wasn't as terrifying as it had seemed. With each passing day, Leah grew stronger, more capable. The world outside hadn't changed, but she had, and that, in itself, was enough. As the days turned into weeks, Leah finally felt the weight of the decision she had made. She wasn't just surviving anymore, she was living. With Emma by her side, Leah was no longer trapped by fear. She had her own path to walk, and though it was uncertain, she was no longer afraid to take the first steps. "We'll be okay, Emma," Leah whispered softly to her daughter as they sat together on the couch. "I promise you that." There was still so much to learn, but Leah was no longer in the dark. She had embraced her new life, and though the journey was far from easy, she was ready to face whatever came next. For the first time in a long while, Leah felt hopeful. And that hope, fragile as it was enough. Leah sat alone in the quiet of her living room, Emma asleep on her lap. The weight of the past few months still lingered in her mind, but now, it was different. She had made it through the hardest part. The chaos, the heartbreak, it was all starting to feel like a distant memory. Yet, the sting of betrayal remained, sharp and undeniable. She had loved Jason, had once believed in the life they could have built together. But now, that dream was shattered. Leah wasn't angry anymore, not in the way she had been. Instead, there was a quiet sadness that filled her heart as she looked at Emma, who was now everything Leah had ever wanted. Pure, innocent, and hers. "I never wanted this life for us," Leah whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "But I'll make it ours. I'll make sure you know love, Emma. Real love." And with those words, Leah knew that no matter what happened, she would give Emma everything she never had. The phone rang again, pulling Leah out of her thoughts. She hesitated for a moment before answering, knowing who it was. It was Jason, the voice she hadn't heard in weeks. "Leah," his voice cracked. I just wanted to say, I'm sorry." His apology wasn't new, but it still hit Leah like a wave, leaving her breathless. She had been waiting for this, hoping for it, but now that it was here, Leah realized she didn't need it anymore. "Jason," Leah said, her voice steady, "I've moved on. You need to do the same. Emma and I are okay. We're going to be okay." There was a long pause before Jason responded, his voice barely a whisper. "I know. I just wanted you to know." And with that, the call ended. Leah didn't feel relief, but she felt something different. An acknowledgement that the past had been closed for good. As Leah looked at Emma, she realized something profound. Forgiveness wasn't for the other person. It was for herself. She had spent so much time harboring resentment and anger toward Jason, toward the circumstances she couldn't control. But now, she was free. Free from the weight of carrying that bitterness, free from the past. She had learned to forgive, not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. "You don't have to carry this burden, Emma," Leah whispered, brushing a lock of hair from her daughter's face. "I'll make sure you grow up knowing what love truly is." In that moment, Leah knew she could never undo the past, but she could build something new, something better. For herself and for Emma. Later that evening, Leah sat by the window, looking out at the city below. It was a cool night, and the world felt still, as if everything had paused just for a moment. Leah had always dreamed of a life that was different, one where she was happy, whole, and free. And now, for the first time, she was beginning to see it take shape. "We'll be okay, Emma," Leah whispered again, her voice filled with certainty this time. "We've made it through the worst, and we're going to keep going." The life Leah had imagined wasn't perfect, but it was hers, and it was enough. As the night drew to a close, Leah held Emma close to her chest, feeling the steady rhythm of her daughter's breath. "I never wanted to be a mother, Emma," Leah whispered, her voice soft and filled with bittersweet emotion. "But when I held you for the first time, I knew. I knew you were the reason I was meant to be here." She kissed Emma's forehead gently, tears welling up in her eyes. "And I'll never let go. No matter what happens, I'll always be here for you." The room was silent, except for the quiet hum of Leah's words. And in that silence, Leah realized that despite everything, despite the heartache, the betrayals, the loneliness, she had found something real, something worth fighting for.